I want a easily identifiable, clear, physical journey to take place on, because I know in that environment, everything else that we're going to talk about next becomes way simpler. There's so many great questions here. So when do you call your shots or an edit good enough? Would be great to know pre-production, also scripting and finding the right storyline. When you go out on your own adventures in film, do you have a shot list, pre-production process in the script, and the conflict with stories? What lenses do you find best to take when making a film? Wow, y'all brought the heat with these questions. So welcome to the Adventure Film Academy show. I am just so fired up on the quality of questions that we got. I put out the request on the socials and you certainly delivered. So much so, in fact, that I'm almost completely overwhelmed. I thought I was going to do like a 15-minute YouTube video over on the main channel, Levi Allen. Yet here we are in the Adventure Film Academy show because there's just too many questions to get to. And I love this. I love that the questions are relevant. They're fantastic. And I want to just share some of my perspective on it, but very much having a conversation going forward with this kind of stuff where I want this to be a place where we are trying to finish things we're proud of. And I want to journey along that and share what I've been learning, and also invite you to do the same. I want you to finish stuff that you actually like. Any question that you ask over on the YouTube feed in the comments of an episode, I will log and try to get to in the future in the end of episodes or things like that. So I very much want to be making it a habit to be addressing some of the things that you are most interested in. We got a host of questions around shot listing, pre-production, and deciding. I'll read several of them out here. When you go on your adventures and film, do you have a shot list in mind, or do you make it up as you go? I'd also love to know what gear you take to keep the weight down. Hey, Levi, would be great to know how you make the pre-production part of an adventure like this. How do you come up with a script when planning for adventure? I'd love to hear about your pre-production process on a solo adventure, how you choose characters, and how you outline the story ahead of time. In a lot of these questions, there seems to be four main themes. One of them is shot listing, how to decide what to film when you're actually there on location, the scripting process, and then pre-production. That's kind of where there's a lot that kind of intersect here on these topics, and we'll take them one at a time. And I think from a pre-planning perspective, a lot of my mental effort is going into two different categories. Most stories that I tell have two layers to them: the physical journey and then the internal experience. And there's some decisions you can make to heighten those two things. What makes interesting stories is to see characters have to make decisions on camera. And ideally, those decisions are challenging ones that cost the person who's making them something. And people don't like watching stories if they don't know what the story is about. When it comes to coming up with ideas, I'm often thinking, what is an obvious is the wrong word here. What is an experience that is a clear narrative, in the sense of, hey, we are going to climb to the top of that mountain there. If you can describe that clearly about the story you're about to partake on, hey, we are going to ride this boat from here, from this port over to this port. Hey, we are going to cross a slackline from this length across to the other side. Basically, you really want to be able to simply describe the narrative potential before the adventure takes place. I would like to go up to that mountain and camp in the snow. You want that part to be clear, because people don't like ambiguity, and it makes the brain have to spend a ton of extra calories trying to figure out, what is this story actually about? So that is the physical journey. I like to know ahead of time, is there a tangible physical journey that is clear? Now, what physical journey you take can have a lot of variables to it, and you can scale this up or down. Usually I want to select one that has some kind of challenge practically. What is hard about it? Is it special? Is it meaningful? Those are all additional layers, but I just want to know, is this a guaranteed outcome? If I know ahead of time that the output, the end result, is almost guaranteed, there's a good chance that's not going to be a great environment for a story to take place. You can't plan for the natural challenges and conflict of story ahead of time, but you can put yourself in an environment where you're increasing the likelihood that's going to occur. So that's kind of my starting point from a physical journey standpoint. I want a easily identifiable, clear physical journey to take place on, because I know in that environment, everything else that we're going to talk about next becomes way simpler. And then I can focus more on the internal experience. So then when I'm coming up with an idea, I want to multiply it off, usually an internal factor or some kind of constraint that can make it more stimulating. So usually in the YouTube format, it does quite well if you mix and match different ideas. So one way that I've tried to do this before is going camping from my dinghy and towing that dinghy with my electric bike. So the physical journeys are pretty easy. Hey, we're going to try make a way to tow this dinghy and go camping in it. And then in that environment, because it's unique and challenging, we can have an environment where the internal stuff that's happening can come out and they can exist at the same time. So you can see me personally processing something internal that's important. And this is always hard for me because I like to process things and I like using video as my way to do that. And it's hard for me to select ahead of time which theme is the best to dive into on a specific project. The one that I'm working on right now is an experience where I went up north alone without food and floated down a river. And for me on that trip, I really wanted to talk about my desire to have certain experiences of my own that were connected to my past with my father and my Opa from up north. And I knew in that environment, that's a personal connection I have that will be we'll be able to have a lot of depth in it for me personally about my why. Like, why am I doing this? And if you have a good, strong physical narrative and you have a deep why, those two together are a superpower, especially if the end result's not guaranteed. So that's the question that I ask myself ahead of time. Is the output guaranteed? If it is, then it's most likely not a good environment for a story. But that being said, you can tell a great story about a Post-it note. If you have the right skill set, it will just take more work. So let's move that on to the next step, which is the pre-planning and the scripting. I kind of started to dive into it there, but depending on how the experience I'm going to go on comes about, I usually want to have a clear idea at the start of what is the physical journey we're going to be taking on this trip. And most of my shots and ideas and the structure of the piece are based around that physical experience first. How do I visually communicate to the audience that this physical journey is taking place and these are the tools and the people we're doing it with? Because that will then define all of my shot listing and my camera angles going forward of how do I anchor this story in reality well. And then my hope is that as we actually go through that physical journey, that the real life stuff, when it comes up, I'll be prepared for and ready for. I might have a sense of that ahead of time. When I've done winter camping, there is a goal to go find storms and snow falling. That is a goal. So I'm hoping for that. I'm trying to set up for that. But that's not always the way that it works out. Or sometimes the storm is just way more aggressive than you're thinking and you weren't prepared for that. So you're trying to establish, okay, let's tell the physical story well, being mentally ready for the personal challenges and the conflict that's just going to come up naturally in that environment, and then deal with that as it comes. I can't script that ahead of time, but I'm certainly hoping that it will take place. And sometimes the conclusion when you come back is, hey, there actually wasn't a very good internal personal story here, and that's just the reality of this trip, and maybe it won't have as deep of a connection, and that's okay. So to expand on the shot listing thing, I almost never shot list because my coverage technique is going to be the same regardless. I don't come up with like a mood board or shot references. I don't have specific camera angles that I'm trying to do that I know ahead of time. I show up with my camera in hand and I cover things the way that my storytelling voice has developed, which is not super complex. And that often is just a variety of wide and tight shots of a physical action taking place. And for me, I don't really need to list that out ahead of time. But what I do need is to be clear with myself, what building blocks do I need to make this story make sense? So usually there's a setup component that needs to be thought through of, okay, I need to show me packing my bags in this method, talk about my mode of transportation. Like those are the kinds of things that I'll write down of like, okay, show prepping the motorcycle for going on this trip. But I'm not actually usually giving a list of the exact shots I need. I'm just kind of outlining the topic. And I'll do that often on a small A5 notepad. I'll write out just on the one sheet here, kind of the main pieces that I need for the setup and make sure that I just kind of get it covered if there's key pieces that I'm missing. But usually the shot listing part is very minimal at most. Moving on to the scripting part, this is something that I like to have an idea of how I'm going to explain what I'm going to go do before I do it. But what I've learned is often doing that style of intro is way easier after, because I've gotten so hung up on doing these concise intros on location while we're about to start the trip and I'm on my 8th, 9th, 10th take. And I'm trying to say, okay, so on this trip, we're going here and I'm going here because, and usually my instinct is almost always to over explain, and it makes it hard to edit from that. So what I do now is I will jot down some notes on a pad of paper about the key points that are important to explain ahead of time and might be helpful to have me saying in person before the trip starts. I will try to include things about what I feel. I will try to do things about the physical plan, say we are going to do this here, and just logically talk it through. And especially, again, talk about my feelings going into it. And later, when we actually build out the intro of the film in the edit, that's where I might have been totally wrong on how I had done that intro on location, but I can tighten it up and pull the pieces I need from actually in person while I was filming, but then use voiceover to make it all tight and condensed like I envisioned at the start, because I like tight and condensed intros, but those are very hard to do before you know what's actually going to take place. So I almost always build the intro for an edit at the end, and it's helpful to give myself the toolkit while I filmed on location to have options, but often a lot of that ends up being voiceover afterwards. That just becomes clear with what actually took place. But something that's absolutely vital is that as the trip is taking place, regardless of what the adventure is I will write down notes that occur to me as the trip is happening. So I will use Siri on my watch to dictate, hey, make this note about this thing and save that for later, or I'll actually take out my notepad and write it. And I do that for my personal solo filmed adventure projects and also when I'm doing documentaries about other people. So these will be topics where I'll say, okay, these are the physical things that need to be explained. I'll write those down. Hey, this is a feeling that I want to dive into. And I always run into the problem of having too much that I want to say and usually not enough. So I'm writing it down so I can get a sense of, okay, what's actually important here to process and what stuff is just too much for the scope of this video. And those notes I will try to include as the project is actually taking place, but then I'll also take those home when I go to my voiceover scripting process when we're actually doing the edit, which occurs much later when we're shaping this into something to be experienced. And then scripting from a narrative standpoint, from a voiceover standpoint, I almost always do that after the fact. And I do that while I'm editing. So my process is to actually write out voiceover ideas in captions on my timeline as I'm editing. I'll make a caption file and punch it in there so I can see it on the timeline. And then I'll go through later and actually record the voiceover directly into my timeline as I'm editing to see how it feels. Because I almost always will write voiceovers that are too long or too wordy. And when I actually go to say things, the words come out differently than I intended them when I wrote them. So that process kind of naturally refines itself where you can see and feel the voiceover on the timeline if you're actually recording it into your editor as you're editing. And then I do multiple, like sometimes I'll record 14, 15, 30 different times throughout an editing process as we're editing straight into the software. And that's kind of my writing process for that. I'll still be taking notes. I'll use the notes app or just physically writing them out, the key kind of points I need. But I find it's very challenging to write out script ideas that naturally feel like how I would say them. That's a very challenging thing for me. So actually just getting to the meat of it by saying it usually works better. I want to interject here and tell you about something that I'm working on. So we are here at the Adventure Film Academy show, and I started Adventure Film Academy as the place to go deeper with people who wanted to learn about the way that I make videos. And specifically, I make a lot of adventure documentaries. And we started by doing in-person things, but more and more we've done online workshops, online webinars, and we're gearing up to introduce to open registration for our fall solo filmmaking masterclass over on Adventure Film Academy. If that is something you might be interested in, I would love to have you join us. It's going to be a rad community of people who want to help hold you accountable and also give you the feedback and the tools and whatever it is that you need for where you're at to make better adventure stories, specifically as a one-person team where you just need to go out there and get the job done. So if that's something you're interested in, go to adventurefilmacademy.com. How do you come up with new ideas for your films? Does it just come to you, or do you sit down and do a kind of brainstorm session, if you will? And adding to that, do you plan ahead of time of a storyline so you know what kind of shots you need, or do you figure it out on the go? This is an area of my workflow that I would like to refine some more. And usually the idea process has been one of the more challenging ones for me. I never really felt like I was good at coming up with ideas. And it's usually through just the journey of life that I will stumble into one. And then I'm often asking myself, how do we improve this for the format of telling a video story? And what I mean by that is sometimes I'll have a mountain that I want to go up or an experience that I want to go have. And so I know, hey, I'm just generally interested in that. I think as a kind of a rule of thumb, most of the stories I personally tell, I'm curious about as a default. And when we move over into the realm of doing solo work, especially filming myself, then the question then becomes, okay, I should probably do this about something that I'm interested in. But then how do we make that actually be an environment where a good story could occur? And that's where I try to come up with some interesting constraint around an experience that I'm already excited about. An example that I'll give is, okay, so there's a local mountain that I want to go up in the winter. Well, how could we make that experience a better suited environment for telling a video story? And that might mean, okay, well, let's try to do the first part of the video on an electric bike in the snow. Let's start it that way. Or let's try do it under a time constraint. I did a video where I tried to go camp in the snow right before catching a flight to Las Vegas. Like, there's some of these variables that out of the gate will make an environment that is more interesting, because I'm not a very personality-based channel in the sense that if I just took you on a camping trip next to a lake, I'm not convinced I could do a good job of making that interesting enough without coming up with some kind of factor that makes it more of a good environment for a story. And so an example, again, would be my friend Jake invited me to go visit his fly fishing lodge that he runs up north. And after I got that invitation, I'm asking myself the question of, okay, I should probably make some great YouTube videos while I'm there, but how do I make this interesting? So the actual lodge itself is like 5-star chef meals, like the most incredible food ever, every night. You're constantly flying in float planes to different lakes and different fishing locations, and it's a 10 out of 10 incredible experience. But from a story perspective, that doesn't have a ton of conflict in it, and I'm not convinced that it's super interesting just to be learning how to fish. So I came up with the idea of, okay, well, how do we make this more interesting? What would I like to do? And I'd always wanted to do a pack rafting trip. So I thought maybe I could take a pack raft up there. And once I got onto that train of thought, the ideas kind of just started escalating. And I thought, okay, what if I do a pack rafting trip and I didn't bring any food? And once I realized that, then so that was kind of the brainstorming session that I did. And then I reached out to Jake and I said, hey, Jake, like, I know this is kind of a strange request, but would you be willing to get a pilot to drop me off somewhere? And then I could make a video about me doing this alone experience and trying to catch my own food. I need to make some improvements to that process because it's making constraints like that can take an experience that's just a normal experience and then make it more interesting. And I do struggle with that when it has to do with me personally. I find it way easier when it's about a subject matter that I'm actually filming. And then on this note, like some people that I really look up to that do this amazingly well, Bo Miles, the way that he comes up with these kind of challenge-based, thoughtful films is brilliant. And he does something in a way that seems effortless, but I know it must take so much work, where he naturally includes the themes and the ideas that he's passionate about into these challenge-based things, and it doesn't feel contrived in the slightest. And he'll do something like walking down the highway gutters to his university where he works, and it'll be a multi-day process of walking these gutters and picking up trash. And in that environment, it's both a stimulating story from a narrative standpoint, but then his internal philosophy about the things that he's processing about his world around them, he includes just so effortlessly. And I love the way he does those two together, where it's the internal story that he's personally experiencing and then also the practical physical adventure. And so that's what I'm trying to do more of, where pick an environment that has an interesting challenge to it, where before the trip even starts, you know there's something unique about it, and then bring yourself into that space with what you're currently processing about the world and have those both exist in the same thing as a combined experience. And that's a very gratifying process to dive into. What lenses do you find best to take when making a film? So I have something that I call the 2-to-1 approach. And that means I almost always take 2 lenses. And I want to pick my first lens as being my all-round zoom lens. So something that goes from wide to tight. And that will almost always be something that is weather sealed and preferably has internal stabilization, depending on how much handheld filming I'm doing versus filming from a tripod. So the 24-to-105 becomes my go-to a lot of the time because it has internal stabilization, and 105 is actually tight enough to get some telephoto feeling shots. And it means that when it's wide at 24, I can get most of my hiking, walking, kind of any of those generic wide angle shots I can easily get with that lens. And it's nice that it can stay on, so I don't have to change lenses in a harsh environment. And I found that it's very helpful having that range. The second lens will be a specialty addition to that, and it's almost always a wide angle. So that would be a 17-to-28 millimeter, 16-to-35, or in my case, I often take the 20 millimeter 1.8 because then it doubles as a low light specialty lens, so I can film scenes in the dark with just kind of a headlamp to light it. And that 1.8 is really helpful in that sense. If I'm not going to be doing much low light and I just want a practical zoom, a 16-to-35 is super practical. I use the 17-to-28 from Tamron. Most of these lenses, if you use the super 35 mode and crop in on the sensor on your camera, if it has that ability, you can kind of get 2 ranges out of that same lens. If I needed to just take one lens, I would take something like the 20-to-40 for self-filming in a light setup, or 20-to-80. Sony has a 20-to-80 f4. The 20-to-80 f4 for a small lightweight setup seems incredible if you took just one lens. And then the 2-to-1, essentially sometimes I will take a specialty additional lens, and that's almost always a super telephoto. So something around the 500 millimeter range for filming subject matter, very close, but that doesn't come on every project. So that's kind of my additional third specialty lens. But I try to not take more lenses than that, because I find if I take more than 2 lenses, most of the time I never use them because changing lenses in harsh environments is kind of annoying. How do you protect your gear from snow in the backcountry? This is twofold. The first thing is I use umbrellas. I'm umbrella gang for life, and I mount them to my tripod and my camera. Over top of it, I carry them. I do whatever I can to keep the bulk of moisture off the lens. In the harsh snow environments, keeping the snow and slush off the camera body will prevent it from freezing and locking your buttons. The second is good camera bags. So I use the Shimoda Action X series when I film in the mountains. I need to make a full breakthrough of how I've been packing these videos, so these questions are a great reminder of that. But I'll just say a quality backpack with good exterior materials is worth its weight in gold when you're in the mountains using a rain cover. They are incredible bags. I'm not just saying that because I got to give feedback on the prototypes. Basically, my feedback to Ian was, these are awesome. You did amazing. Great. When can I get one in bright colors? That's what I'll say on that. And also, unfortunately, a lot of plastic bags gets used. So when I use audio recorders and things like this, I put them into plastic bags and close them. I try to reuse them as much as I can because moisture gets everywhere and electronics do not like moisture. That's kind of like the Cliff Notes version. How heavy is your backpack? Is there a threshold weight for you? Depends on the duration and the elevation that we're going to gain. I like to be around 60 pounds when I'm carrying camera gear, which is a massively heavy bag. That is absurd, but that's usually what it takes in the 60 to 50 pound range with all of the gear and the camping stuff. If I'm on production, making a documentary about a subject matter, that can ratchet up pretty quickly, especially if we start taking silly things like gimbals. The beautiful part about doing solo is that you can go as slow as you need to, but weight is a massive struggle back and forth all the time. How do you balance choosing when to go on solo adventures and film versus just going on the adventure part to enjoy it? I'm in a weird spot where I feel motivated to go on the solo adventures when I'm excited about capturing the visual side of it. And this is a tension for me because doing a solo trip while you're filming definitely changes the dynamics of the whole experience, no question. It's hard for me to mentally plan to do solo trips unless I can make a video about it, because at this stage of my life, with how busy it is with family, that just feels like a selfish thing to do, to just go off on my own. So I rarely go off on my own if I'm not going to be filming it. If I want to do something that I'm not filming, I want to be with my family. Another question in the same vein: how do you find balance between being present and enjoying the adventure and being in production mode? I genuinely enjoy the process of capturing things visually. Even if I'm not doing it for a full film project, I love taking out my phone, my camera, whatever I have with me, and capturing images of it taking place. That's just the way my brain thinks, and it's how I really enjoy it. I love finding visual moments that I feel captures what I'm feeling in that moment. For me, it's very helpful if it's a long-term trip with other people and I want to enjoy the experience. It's helpful for me to decide, okay, today I'm going to film and then the next day I won't. Because the truth is, the days that I decide to film, it will be a big part of my day mentally to do that. And the good part is that I enjoy that. I like thinking in that way. I like finding the story. I like asking people questions. I like trying to connect together the conflict and make it make sense for someone at home who's going to watch it. So that for me kind of adds meaning to the experience, but certainly it can be exhausting for the other people I'm with, depending on what their interest level is on the video that I'm making. So for the sake of other people in my life, I will make it clear that when the camera's away, it's off. I don't try to like pull it out and do half and half. I can't do half and half very well. It's either all one or all the other. When do you call your shots or an edit good enough? Knowing that you may not see perfection in a shot, how and when do you say that's good enough? I can't believe I just subscribed to your channel. Never seen your stuff, but I'm binge watching now. Well, great to have you. For me, I definitely struggle more with the edit than I do the actual filming process. I don't stress so much while I'm filming, worrying about if my frame is perfect. I like the humanity of choosing my angles as I'm there in person and just using my curiosity as the kind of compass that I use to guide my filming decisions about, oh, could we film it from this angle? Should we get this tight shot? So I'm usually not too stressed as we're filming about the shot itself. But on the edit side, knowing what is good enough is tough. And for me, my internal mental rule is 7 out of 10. If we can get to 7 out of 10 quality in the edit for my internal standard, that is a win. To get to 7 out of 10 is an immeasurable amount of work. It is hard, but I know when I feel I am there, because it takes just as long to get to 7 out of 10 as it does to take a 7 and make it into an 8 or even a 9. And if I feel like the story would be so much better served by spending that extra time, then I might choose to. But oftentimes in that 7 to 8 range in my quality meter, I know, hey, we're there and I'll be satisfied. So there could be a lot more said about that, and maybe we should do a full episode on it, but that's kind of the simple version. Who is your inspiration in photography and video world when you were starting out? There were many, and every time I answer this question, I usually include a couple different names to switch things up. But Devin Supertramp was one of the big YouTube ones for me. Corridor Digital, Freddie W. I was glued to those videos. But from the adventure film side, Ty Evans, incredible skateboard filmmaker. I loved his films. Obviously, Curtis Morgan with Art of Flight, that changed snowboarding filmmaking forever, in my opinion. And then Seb Montaz is someone who lit the fire under me from a slacklining perspective. So Seb is in Europe and in France, I believe. And the stuff that he makes, he originally did this film called Flight of the Frenchies. And that was a massive inspiration to me, especially in the route that I ended up taking with my first big film, which was Untethered. So very much look up to those people. How do you balance out energy levels when solo filmmaking? I find adventures take a lot out of me, and that can affect my filmmaking process. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to manage. And I think one thing that's important is to just acknowledge when you film things, it's going to take 2 or 3 times as long. So slowing down the pace and then strategically applying effort. So I can't film each segment of a project with full effort and intensity. What I'll do then is decide, okay, is this a section of the adventure that needs to be filmed? And if it is, at what effort am I going to film it? Knowing that I can't be 10 out of 10 the whole trip. That means if I'm going to get my drone shots and get the 360 shots and get the walking by the tripod shots, if I make that decision, I'm going to do it well. It's going to take the time it takes, but acknowledge I can't keep that up for the whole trip. So spend that effort wisely and acknowledge, okay, if I'm not going to be spending full effort, acknowledge the limitation of scaling back how many shots I'm going to get at this next moment. That's okay. It's okay to just get some basic generic coverage and accept that. And then when a more important moment comes, ratchet it back up. And what will sometimes happen is the adventure unfolds in a way where I encounter something that is surprising, is challenging, is unique. And then I'll work backwards from that to support it with better production value. So sometimes things happen on a trip, like a windstorm on top of a mountain that you didn't prepare for. So then mentally, once it's happening, I didn't prepare for that well, but then I'll backtrack and try to get the coverage and the shots I need to actually build out that moment in a way that will suit the film well. So that effort is always kind of ebbing and flowing. And the thing I like the least about making videos about my solo adventures is that often while I'm just out there hiking, my brain is trying to solve how I'm going to film the next section. And that can just be kind of exhausting because there's so much time when you're out there. I may be filming 1/10 of the time. And so that means 9/10 of the time, my brain will just be thinking about what to film next. And that's annoying. So I've actually now started to take music with me a lot more, or audiobooks, so I can take my mind off my brain trying to problem solve what to film next, because often a lot of that stuff doesn't actually need to be planned out. And by me trying to plan it out, it's forcing it into a certain direction that might not be helpful. What excites you the most today after doing this for so long? Anything that's challenging. I love a challenge. I love learning new stuff. And a camera has been my all access pass to meeting fascinating people. So if I can meet a fascinating person and do something challenging personally, that's just an absolute win for me. And then also making stuff, modifying stuff. I love that. If I can build or tinker or mess with something, that just gets me so fired up. Like, it's my dream, if the YouTube money is ever, if I ever strike it rich on YouTube, I would love to just buy a ton of property, a ton of shipping containers, and just build a compound where I just make stuff, like physical big objects, and modify, and it would be awesome. I would love that. Also, check out the Hard is Easy YouTube channel. He makes some of the best content on climbing on the internet. Great job. How do you make a living as an adventure filmmaker? What clients are willing to hire you? TV shows, commercials, documentaries. At the start, no one wanted to hire me because I didn't have the evidence that I could make what I said I could make. So I worked a job that had nothing to do with filmmaking and tried to make stuff that I could be proud of in the vein of what I wanted to get hired for. And eventually I had a somewhat resembling a portfolio of work. And I find people will try to hire you for what you show them you can make. And so I started to get hired for more biking related things, but then I knew I wanted to get more into storytelling. So I tried to do more storytelling based films. And that kind of blossomed into a career where the main way where I've made money is as a director of documentaries, where I show up and produce it full turnkey from beginning to end. So I'll show up for a client, make them a documentary, usually short form, under 20 minutes, usually adventure based, and offer that as a service to them. Yeah, things have changed a little bit where now I do more videos that actually include me in it as a service for a client. So they maybe want to have my storytelling voice be a part of what I'm actually making. So that's kind of hilarious because I never actually wanted to be in my stories when I was starting. And then I do camera operating. So sometimes someone needs a documentary filmmaker and they say, hey, can you come operate a camera? And I say, will do. I show up, I film for a day and take a day rate. And then obviously I make some money from the YouTube videos that I upload, where Google will give me some AdSense. And then sometimes I do my own sponsors on those videos. And then I get support from audience members who want more of those films. And then I also supplement all of this with a business that I run called Adventure Film Academy that I've now talked about plenty of times, where I teach videos. So that's some of it. This could be a massive discussion on its own. Adventure filmmaking, especially capturing beautiful landscapes, has for me always been in the wide angle, but more and more clients want vertical because they think reels are the ultimate thing now. How do you deal with filming horizontal and vertical? Well, I don't. Vertical is not my priority. It never has been, probably never will be. It's not the way my brain thinks. I know I'm missing out on opportunities here. I know I'm missing out on reaching potential people who are interested. It's not what I do. I'm a long form storyteller, and thinking in short form hurts my brain. I crop my horizontal content. When I'm doing work for a business, I will almost always crop content out of my horizontal stuff and just pray that I framed it wide enough or find some workaround to get vertical content out of that. I've occasionally been producing reels for clients, and I will film those with my phone and just only film vertical. Doing both at the same time for me is just a disaster waiting to happen, and I don't. I'm considering filming some trail running races. What's your recommendation for gear and setup for decent audio and visual quality? Also 4K or not? Audio is massively important, and I highly recommend everyone who ever does adventure filmmaking getting an audio recorder that can record in 32-bit float and putting a lav mic on your subject matter. I use the Tentacle Sync Track E. This is an effective tool for also syncing that audio with timecode. I do not use wireless because it is too unreliable and the batteries die way too fast. It is a disaster waiting to happen. I've never had good success with wireless in the field. So I use these pocket recorders, put them in my subject matter, hit record, put the lav mic somewhere obvious on them where it's not going to get scratchy, and get my sound that way. This is so important. If you have good sound, it will save you later. When I'm doing doc work, I usually have multiple of them, put them on multiple people. The Tentacle tools for syncing up. You don't have to use Tentacle. There's other audio recorders out there that do 32-bit float, but the 32-bit float means you don't have to worry about setting your level. So if someone screams, you can still capture that audio and it's not going to be clipped. For video gear, whatever you can get your hands on that's available. There's way too many factors there, but basically whatever you can use reliably, use that. Like whatever you can get your hands on, use it. And use it ideally before you go and film on the race day, so you're actually familiar with it and you know its limitations. That's the most important thing. Know the limitations of the gear you're using before you go to film. Mobile phones with the action modes now these days, the results you can get from that for trail running is fantastic. I filmed a documentary of trail running using a mobile phone in the action mode, and I could just hold it or put it on a mobile gimbal. Like, don't underestimate phones because they're so small and light, and you can use them on small portable gimbals. That's just a couple of my thoughts on that. Don't forget audio. Get wind puffies on everything, especially in an outdoor environment. It is just critical. Audiences will not stand poor audio quality. You ran a storytelling and production training, boat trips, and perhaps still do. If you don't mind sharing what you feel keeps people from pursuing filmmaking, perfectionism, technology hurdles, lack of time. I think perfectionism and lack of time are the two biggest ones. Technology, we have so much available from every tool now, and so many people have the tools that if you have friends that make videos, you can borrow, you can rent, you can lend your time. I don't think technology is the biggest one, but I think people perceive that as being the biggest. But we have so much access to learning. Every answer is available out there that I don't think technology is the big one. I think it's the desire to have your work be better than you know you're capable of. Perfectionism, that's the big one. And we have a full episode coming to the Adventure Film Academy show about perfectionism and how that regularly holds me back. So that's going to be a great episode. But I think the desire to have your work be better than you know you're currently capable of is so debilitating. But the only pathway to get better is by doing. And so I think what most people need to do is understand your first projects are going to have a lot of issues with them, but it's by learning from those mistakes that will help you then get better. So those two go very much hand in hand. And then the lack of time thing, massively. Most people aren't willing to make the sacrifices in their lifestyle to support a passion like filmmaking. It takes insane amounts of time. You have to say no to so much extra stuff in your life because there just purely isn't the space. And ideally, you still keep healthy things in your life that you enjoy doing, so that way you don't end up 20 years down the road and realize you did nothing fun. But for particular moments in time where you're working on a project, it's going to take most of your mental effort, and that means you're saying no to a lot. And depending on what you currently spend your time on, that might be too much to ask, and you might not want to give that stuff up, and just be honest with yourself then. But if you really want to do it, then you need to start carving out the unessential things to make space for this thing that you're saying is important to you. And that's hard. There was questions about lightweight filming gear. My process is to use mirrorless cameras for my high-level production filming because mirrorless cameras take less power and have a smaller form factor, so the batteries are a lot easier to use. Currently, I use the Sony systems, the A7S Mark III, the A7 IV, all brilliant cameras. I really like the mirrorless form factor because the autofocus is often amazing and you've got lots of different lens choices. I will take a small amount of lenses with me, usually just 2. I'll take audio gear that's simple. I won't take wireless audio. I take pocket recorders that can go in my pocket and have a lav mic with it. I'll take the smallest carbon tripod I possibly can. I'll take basically the most minimal amount of things that I can get away with. I'll take the small drones. But then at a certain point, I just realized on these trips, the weight and the volume of stuff, especially in the winter, is monstrous. It is just so much stuff. I try to pare down the size of the kit every single time I go out. It seems to always just be so much weight. I don't take gimbals anymore on solo self-film stuff. Like, what am I doing with a gimbal? I try to just keep it small and minimal and just down to only what I need. Like, I'm not taking a monitor usually on a self-film project. I'm not taking the extra stuff. And then even down to my lens choices, I will pick lenses that I know are lighter and smaller form factor purely because it will make the self-filming process more straightforward. When I'm doing documentary stuff where I'm filming other subject matter, that's where usually I have to expand some of my equipment a little bit and take a couple more things here or there. But that's a little bit of a more nuanced discussion of what's actually important for getting the production done and getting the highest quality results. That conversation usually morphs a little bit. But usually between a mirrorless camera and my phone, I can get so much done with the 360 camera added on there for the action shots, maybe a drone if you need it, a small portable one. Kind of just the normal basic stuffs, right? Like just like the bare bones, that what you need. I will always be taking a shotgun mic to go on top of the camera with a wind puffy. What are the key pitfalls to avoid and strategic tips to enhance a career in adventure filmmaking, focusing beyond the technical basics? I think it's really hard to navigate if this is something that you're passionate about, making things that you can be proud of making and then also leveraging that for work relationships. And this is something that I massively failed at, where I would work so hard on finishing a film and spend very little time on worrying about or thinking about how do we make the next one or how could we make money from the one we just finished. And this could either be done through developing a partnership with someone who's more passionate from a producing standpoint, because those people do exist. I haven't encountered someone like that in my life that the partnership felt natural, and it's held me back. I could, and I maybe should have spent more effort. The struggle is to produce films requires money and time. Usually it requires mostly time, so therefore it needs money. And it's hard if you're excited about just getting the project done. It's hard to prioritize making the money side of it as important as it actually is. And my solution to that for most of my career was to just work really hard on client work and then pay for it myself. And if I had spent a little bit more time on trying to get partnerships going early, there should have been a way to get financing involved from external parties in a way that would have gone better. And now we've been able to have a little bit more of that in some of our projects, and especially having the YouTube channel can help with that, where things don't have to just make money by being viral and getting YouTube views. But this is a challenging thing when you're balancing, do you want to do it as a craft for your passion, or do you want to do it as a business? And most of us want to do it as both, and having those two competing desires is quite challenging. So I've ended up going down a route where a lot of the things I make for passion I make them from a place where they don't need to make money. And then I do production work for actual clients to do the projects that actually make money. And because we have a low overhead and I normally film and edit things myself, then we can keep production expenses low enough that I can self-produce projects that don't have to make money. But it's a very challenging song and dance. And I often tell people, if you don't want to do this full time, that might be a very good decision. It might be the best thing in your life to decide, I just want to do this as a hobby and keep this as a passion. I want to keep working my day job. I want to keep working whatever career I'm in and use adventure filmmaking as something that I do just for fun. And I think that's a beautiful decision to arrive at, because it is tough turning your passion into something that needs to make money. That's just a tough dance. And man, it's such a pitfall for so many of us. And if I had spent more time thinking about that when I was starting, I think some of the really challenging areas that I hit at different points in my career could have been smoothed out a little bit. And I probably could have made some better things and worked with some better people, because more funding means you can work with people, because people require money to work with. And that's kind of something that I've missed out at, is that collaborative process, especially throughout the years. I wish that there was more people that I could work with. This turned into a monster episode. I think each one of these questions could be their own individual episode. And that is kind of awesome. If you felt, it would be very helpful for me if you listened all the way through here to the end. If there was an aspect of this that you felt was the most interesting or helpful for where you currently are, I would so value hearing that from you in the comments. It's challenging for me to know when we talk about these conversations, okay, which stuff of this is actually unique or helpful for where you are at. So if you let me know that, that would be great. You can ask me more questions. If you're in the audio only feed, great to have you. Go to the description of the podcast episode, click on the YouTube link, drop a comment there, and let me know what you want to do, what you want me to do more episodes about. I have a blast doing this. Thanks for having this conversation with me. It's not a conversation. I'm just talking. Well, you asked questions. It is a conversation. You asked me questions. That's going to be it for this one. Remember, life's better when you make stuff. Peace.